Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, a Northside Numbers game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, Baseball Rabbit Hole, and now Bricks Behind the Ivy. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, where you can support the show and find a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter, or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. The spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. And if you've done that, thank you. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's January 14th, and the Cubs continue to make moves in the margins. But for today, a step back from the Cubs offseason, I'm joined by the voice of the Iowa Cubs, Alex Cohen. We talked about his MLB debut and his broadcasting philosophies and get into some of the talent coming through Des Moines. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by the voice of the Iowa Cubs, Alex Cohen. Alex, how are you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, looking forward to baseball season when it's not, negative 13-degree wind chill and like 6-degree temperature right now in Iowa. So yeah, things are great. I'm really looking forward to warmth either in Arizona or Iowa or Chicago or wherever it may be. So
yeah, we've had the cold weather in Charlotte, but our cold is like maybe it gets down in the 20s at night.
It's not that. That would be ball. Yeah, that'd be t-shirt. So
yeah, I grew up in Iowa, and I know that weather, and there's a reason why I live in Charlotte.
Absolutely.
But so hey, it's been had you on a while back, but lots happened since then. One thing I really want to dig into to start off with is you got to make your major league debut this year.
I did.
Let's talk about that a little bit. That
Sure.
had to be really, really cool.
It's awesome. It was everything that it lived up to be and more. And when people say, when you get to the big leagues, it's the same game. It's just same play, just a different auditorium. It's a lie. The press boxes are bigger. The stats are more, in tune with what you want to do. There's so much more information. There's so much more, production quality to it. And there's so many more people listening in. So it was different. And you really had to buckle down, especially that first game, and take a couple deep breaths and make sure that I wasn't talking too fast and too excited. But once we got into the full rhythm of the game, and I think the Cubs really helped. That first game at Busch Stadium, they hit 6 home runs. It was the day before the All-Star break, and 2 guys hit multi-home run games. So the players definitely did their part. But Cubs-Cardinals, first ever big league game in the regular season, at Busch Stadium, it doesn't get much better and bigger than that. So it was a lot of fun.
That's incredible. It's funny how I've seen it in my own professional life and even podcasting a little bit, how something you do all the time, like you broadcast a lot of sporting events, can just feel so different.
It definitely felt different for the first half hour. And then you have your drink of water, you settle in, you recognize, the sight lines are the same, the dimensions are the same, but Cubs-Cardinals is a little bit different than Iowa Cubs Omaha Storm Chasers, and recognize that pretty quickly.
Yeah. So you also do. You mentioned before we came on here that you're doing the Iowa State women's game tonight. So talk to me about the difference of being a team's announcer. The voice of the Iowa Cubs, or should you ever potentially be the Cubs announcer? Like that's a real fan relationship versus like. I know you do a lot of Iowa State stuff given where you are, but it's different than being the team's announcer to pop in, whether it's ESPN or Marquee or some cable network covering event. Like, what's it like building that relationship with the fans? What do you focus on?
It took a while. I'm not from Iowa originally. I grew up on the East Coast. So I thought naturally coming into Des Moines, it would take a month, a season. I mean, it took a legitimate year and a half to really feel comfortable telling the storylines that these people care about from like a fan perspective and also from a local perspective. I mean, you have to know what makes these fans tick, whether it is a certain player or a certain rivalry, whether it's the Iowa Cubs and the Omaha Storm Chasers, as I said, or the Iowa Cubs or the St. Paul Saints. What people care about. Sometimes it's prospects. Sometimes it's storylines. Sometimes it's rivalry. Sometimes it's the weather. Sometimes it's food. So you really just have to be in tune with what the fans on a given day might like to hear or might like to hear me talk about. And I think in the big leagues, it's a little bit different than in minor league baseball because you can always revert back to this guy's a two-time All-Star, or this guy's a first-round draft pick, or this guy's from Chicago, or this guy played with somebody else on the other team. In the minor leagues, you have to get a little bit more creative than that. So just being able to, one, be creative, and two, figure out what the Iowa Cubs fans like, not specifically the Chicago Cubs fans or Cubs fans in general, but the Des Moines, Iowa Cubs fans like. It takes time, it takes reps, it takes games. So it's a very intimate, in-depth relationship.
Yeah, I found I was very interested in broadcasting when I was a kid, and I grew up in Iowa, so I had Jim Zabel was the voice of the Hawkeyes forever until I was out of college, and I came in I think I caught the last year of Jack Brickhouse, and then it was Harry Carey. Harry Carey and Steve Stone lived at my house for 20 years.
Did they pay rent?
It got in my head a lot. But I've noticed over the years when, Chip Carey took over for a while, and then it was Len Casper, and now it's Boog. There is that adjustment period. Len became one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But probably for the first year and a half, I was not crazy about it. It was just different.
It takes a while. It does. I mean, it takes a while for the fans. It takes a while for the broadcaster. It takes a while for the broadcaster to work with the color analyst that they might not know. You have to be patient, and that is not a redeeming quality in any sports fan, especially with myself. But you have to be patient with that.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I think that makes a big point too, the relationship with the color analyst, because Len came on with Bob Brumley, who I thought I liked, but all of a sudden I liked Len Casper a lot more when JD came in. I mean, I've always liked JD, so maybe it was him, maybe it was Len growing on me, but there is that. That's a piece I'm very interested in, because it really is that relationship. It's a voice you hear all the time. It is, there are storylines. Baseball, you play 162 games, and if you're the voice of the Cubs on marquee, you're not doing all the games of what you're probably doing 145, 150.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're playing in Miami, and it's a Tuesday night, and the Cubs are getting beat 7-2, and there's just kind of nothing to talk about. But I guess you see the same thing with the Iowa Cubs. You build up those storylines over the course of a season.
Yeah, and I think with minor league baseball, it's a little bit easier just because you can dive into prospects. And a lot of the times in minor league baseball, you're doing it solo. So you have that rhythm and that rapport with yourself. You don't have to focus on, all right, well, it's 7-2, Cubs are trailing, they've lost 5 straight. How is so-and-so feeling? I know how I'm feeling. I know how I can communicate that. I know how I can make it interesting. But when you have a color analyst, and I love doing games with a color analyst, I think it's a better broadcast. It's a big league broadcast. But during those times, when you don't have to worry about somebody else, how they're feeling, what they're doing, it makes it a little bit easier. And in the big leagues, you have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. The 2 games you did, I think, did you do one with JD and one with Elise?
Yeah, so I did one with JD and one with Joe Girardi. Joe
Girardi, that's right. And it was only one with JD. How's it like working with different people? You're making your major league debut, you don't even have a constant voice beside you.
Yeah, it was a great learning experience, because I think JD's great. I think Joe Girardi's great. They're completely different. They couldn't be more different. So just being able to adjust to that on the fly, and you look at Joe Girardi's prep sheet, and I mean, it is documents and documents and spreadsheets and data and data. I mean, he's approaching a game like he's a manager, but man, he's brilliant. He's smart. And then you call a game with JD, and he's just so funny and so dry and so laid back, and has a mixture of broadcast and comedic timing that, I mean, I've never really seen with any color analyst. So just being able to jive with both of them and being able to bring the best out of both of them, I mean, it was a tremendous learning experience.
Yeah, man. JD's style is fun, and oftentimes they kind of flip to him, and he's kind of leaning back in the chair, and I guess that's
he's the best. I mean, he treats baseball the way it's supposed to be treated, which is fun. It's laid back to the listener and the watcher, so they can sit down in their chair with the beer and watch the television. And that's the part that I gravitate the most towards. And I think he does just a spectacular job.
Yeah, it is. So I actually kind of like splitting the games up a little bit and getting the other voices, when there's a national game. It's just a different perspective. But it was I noticed this year, Boog. I've listened to Boog for years and years and years on ESPN. And then he comes over to Marquee, and it's so different. You have to be night and day different. And I remember Joe Buck. Like I would hear him call a Cardinals game, could not stand him. Not that he's necessarily my favorite announcer anyway, but he's a completely different announcer when he's doing a national game.
You have to be. When you're the broadcaster of a team, like I know I was like, well, you can't be biased. You have to be biased. Oh, he's broadcasting a team for 150 games. Like naturally, your life is better. Things are better when they win. You are rooting for them to win. So you can't be unfair. You can't be, ignorant to baseball. You can't be illogical in regards to the stuff that's going on. But you do naturally have to be biased. You have to hope and communicate your hope that the Cubs are going to win and they're going to play well. So I happen to be a big fan of Boog. And I'm not just saying that because, you work alongside of him and you work with the same company as him. He's one of my favorite broadcasters before his time with the Cubs. I just think that he has a really good balance of talking about the game and talking about the stats and talking about new age baseball, old age baseball, having fun, not taking himself too seriously. I think Cubs fans are really, really lucky when they have on both sides with Boog doing all the games on TV and Pat Hughes doing the majority of the games on radio. There's no better broadcast team in my opinion. So.
Pat Hughes is so great. I love when he flips over the TV every so often, filming for Boog.
Yeah.
Who else did you look up to on the broadcast side when you were growing up? Who else did you follow? I guess you probably Harry Callis, right?
Yeah, Harry is my guy. He was my soundtrack this summer, and you listen to him, and his voice is deep and grizzled and soaked in cigarette smoke and whiskey, and it's just exactly what you would expect baseball to sound like. And you really have to gravitate your style to the fan base, and Philadelphia is definitely blue collar, off the cuff, like to say what's on their mind, and Harry did that. So I think that just being able to listen to him and how authentic he was. When I got into broadcasting, I just wanted to be authentically myself whenever I found that voice. And it took a while, but once I found it, that's just kind of the motto that I live by. So,
yeah, I think that's probably one of the hardest things. You're up there trying to project an image or project gravitas, and you find it your own way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's kind of get in the prospect side. So you've been the voice of the Iowa Cubs here at really a really cool time.
Yeah.
You've been able to see, what do they have? I think 7 top 100s now after they traded one away.
Yeah.
And you're seeing these guys come up. Obviously, we've seen the downside, we just did with Brendan Davis. All the injuries stack up. We talked about him last time you were on the show, and you were talking about what a pro he was, and I hate to see that happen, but he's kind of the worst case scenario example of a guy who has the talent, never got a shot, and it's injury related.
I mean, it just happens a lot. I mean, it's not just a curse to the Cubs organization. I mean, you look at, remember Mike Oltney had the eye injury. You look at some other organizations, top prospects, Forrest Whitley, arm for the Houston Astros, who was expected to be the next ace. He just had injury after injury after injury. So it just happens. Your body breaks down. You have fluke injuries. It's difficulty to come back from them. So I feel awful for Brendan, especially knowing the person that he is and just seeing that he has a new lease on his baseball life with the New York Yankees. I mean, I hope he hits bombs in the Bronx. It's just not against the Cubs. So, but it's an exciting time to be a Cubs fan, whether it's seeing Owen Casey at the AAA level all season last year, and seeing guys like Matt Shaw, James Triantos, Kevin Alcantara come up in the middle of the season, and then Alcantara making his big league debut. I mean, especially from an offensive perspective, there are some really big time impact guys that are in the not so distant future for the Cubs.
How much are those guys just chomping at the bit to get their shot? I mean, I assume they all want it yesterday.
I mean, they wanted it last year. And I can imagine, I mean, you're just so close, but yet so far. And I've talked about this before, the disparity between AAA baseball life and big league baseball life. I mean, there's a bigger disparity with that than there is between rookie ball and AAA. I mean, it's just so different between the flights and the stadiums and the amenities and the hotels and the nutrition programs and the way that, the staff treats you and just all the stuff that you have at your disposal at the big leagues. I mean, I'm not saying that AAA baseball is bad, but you could tell these players from what they've heard from guys in their own clubhouse that have been back and forth to mentors that they have up in the big leagues. I mean, it's just, all right, I need to do my job here. Like I need to rake, I need to throw strikes, I need to get guys out. so I can get up there and reach the top of the totem pole. I mean, there is a chopping at the bit, I think doesn't even do it justice. They want it. So
Well, I think we saw last year, especially with PCA, that there's just a clock that has to start. And I think I've heard over the years you kind of see the best stuff in Double A because some of the best pitchers don't necessarily stay in the minors that long. But then you see more like the veteran reliever types, the up down guys in Triple A. But there's just such a difference in adjusting to major league pitching that to some extent I think the guys just have to go. And we saw the PCA grew so much last year.
you did. You just have to give them a rope to do it. And it's more difficult to do that for a team that is contending or a team that's a big market team. Now, you look at some of the guys that are in Oakland, in Detroit, in Florida or Miami, and they get 200 or 250 at bats to figure it out. And sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail. And the bigger market teams, you don't really have that. So just makes things a little bit more difficult. You brought up a great point. You said that the majority of the talent, especially pitching wise, is at the Double A level. I actually think it's based on the time of year. I think you see the best pitching. I think you see the best caliber of play at the Triple A level in June. Because at the beginning of the year, you still have guys who are held back a little bit, especially from a pitching standpoint. Yeah, you're held to 50, 75, 80 pitches. When you get to June, people are warmed up. They're getting into their rhythms. And that's when you see the guys who raked at Double A or threw well at Double A going up to Triple A, getting that cup of coffee there if they do play well. And then in July and then in August, they get brought up. So I would say the beginning of June, like, that is really good baseball at the Triple A level because you get those arms who shove their first 2 months of Double A. They want to accelerate them up to the big leagues. And then you see the bats finally getting out of the cold, finally getting into the swing of things. So I would say you're right with Double A, probably the first 6 weeks of the season, especially from a pitching perspective. I would say the best caliber of minor league baseball is Triple A, though, from about Memorial Day to the trade deadline, in my opinion.
No, that's fair. Yeah, it's interesting to see the guys that have been coming through. I remember, when did you start with the Iowa Cubs? Was it
2018?
2018, okay. So I remember back when the best of the Cubs farm system was Amaya, Alzolay, Braylon Marquez, Brennan Davis.
Yeah.
And now we're at a point where Miguel Amaya's there, and of those top guys, like, he's the only one left.
Yeah.
But that was after, of course, the Cubs had that huge run where they hit on everybody for like 5 years. So that's has to balance out.
Hit on Happ, hit on Schwarber, hit on Bryant. Obviously, Almora had time up in the big leagues. You would consider that a success. And yeah, it's completely different. I mean, I would say that, Alzolay wasn't a draft pick. He was an international free agent signing. Yeah. They didn't sign him for that much money. You got your impact out of Adbert Alzolay for sure. But yeah, obviously, Braylon Marquez didn't pan out. Brennan Davis was injured. He's now with the Yankees. So it's a completely different farm system now that they acquired via trades and first round draft picks that they hit on or presumably have hit on.
Well, I think they've been doing a much better job now of getting more depth in the draft. I think since Dan Kantrovitz took over in 2021, I just see so many guys like moving up every year, and some of it probably is the consolidation of the minors. Honestly,
I really like what they've done in the first round. It seems like they've put an emphasis on college first round hitters or college first round pitchers. Obviously, there's a certain ceiling aspect to it that isn't as high when you get a high school player, but the floor is a lot higher as well. So getting guys like Jordan Wicks, who was a seasoned pitcher out of Kansas State, or Matt Shaw was a seasoned hitter out of Maryland, Nico Horner is a seasoned hitter out of Stanford, Cam Smith, who obviously ranked with Florida State, and then you trade him for Kyle Tucker. So I really think that they've done a nice job identifying the talent that they want out of their first rounders and where they want them slotted and hitting on those picks.
It's going to be really interesting to see how the Cubs are able to get some of those guys at bats. Now, it looks like Matt Shaw is probably going to get every chance to make the opening day roster and probably start. We'll see what else the Cubs do.
Yeah.
But I remember like in 2015, the Cubs would have an injury in the outfield. They'd bring Kyle Schwarber up for like 10 days, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And send them back down. They did the same with Wilson Contreras in 2016. I would like to see them get more creative because I think in the last couple of years, especially 2022, like a guy like Matt Mervis, we'll see if I hope he does well in Miami. But like that year, the Cubs weren't good. That probably was a chance where maybe they could have gotten him 200 at bats and give him a chance to fail. And
and they had a similar situation in 2021 as well, where they were bringing up guys who I like a lot, and I saw a lot, like Jared Young and catchers as well. But I mean, they just didn't fit into the fabric. I won't go with the fabric, the future of the Chicago Cubs. You would like to see those who you expect to figure into the future of the Chicago Cubs get those ABs when you were out of contention in September. Now, I'm not expecting the Cubs to be out of contention this September. I think they win the Central, in my opinion. But
I do too.
yeah, I would like to see those young guys, whenever those opportunities are. I mean, I think it gets a little bit more difficult when they're not on the 40-man. If they are on the 40-man, if they do have options left. So, but if they are on the 40-man roster, you want to see them have those opportunities.
Well, that's where, I think Owen Casey's in a good spot. Obviously, Matt Shaw's probably going to be up. Kevin Alcantara's already been up. Those guys are all on the 40-man. Like Moises Ballesteros is not yet. So that, like you said, that'll be a hurdle to get over. On the pitching side, though, the Cubs have done a much better job. I remember for a span of like 5 years, the only pitcher they really brought up was Rob Zastryzny, who's now back.
Who's back?
Yes.
Reunion tour.
Him and Colin Ray, like it is kind of a reunion tour in some ways. But many, many more guys. I think last year they pitched, I think at one point I counted, I think 12 pitchers pitched that came up through the Cubs system and were less homegrown. We're seeing that now, but we're also starting to see the roster crunch. I think they've finally gotten to a point where they're better and there aren't easy and obvious cuts. And so today, to make room for Colin Ray, who I just mentioned, the Cubs let Michael Arias go, who they put on the 40-man just last season to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. Were you surprised by that move?
Yeah, I mean, you never know, what's behind the curtain. If he's a little bit banged up, if there's something that they weren't projecting well. But yeah, from a pure naked eye standpoint, I mean, he's got great stuff. I mean, 95 to 97, good changeup, good slider. He's a guy who was ranked as high as 9 on their top 30 prospect list. He had some difficulty throwing strikes last year, but remember, he was a shortstop conversion player. So he hasn't necessarily been pitching for all that long, but I think it's showing how deep the Cubs are, or what they believe they are, when it comes to their pitching, and their 40-man roster crunch, and guys who they project to really help with that, middle of the bullpen. So if you think that Michael Arias isn't going to make the big leagues over Caleb Killian, over Brandon Birdsell, over Daniel Palencia, I mean, over Jack Neely, I mean, there's guys and guys and guys. So at some point, you're like, all right, is X going to help in the big leagues more, or is Y going to help in the big leagues more? And if they think Jack Neely or Gavin Hollowell, who they picked off of waivers last year, what I thought was really impressive. If they think that those guys are going to help the Chicago Cubs in 2025 and 2026 over Michael Arias, then you have to make that move.
Yep. Well, we're getting to the point now where the Cubs also have a good number of guys who I think they like who don't have options. And so I would imagine that we'll see how the battles go in spring training, but often those kinds of guys start the season on the team unless they're traded, and then see where it goes.
Yep.
Like they might get first crack. So that a guy like Keegan Thompson now is out of options. He is going to be Chicago.
So they're really well last year.
He did.
And guy, like, they've made some really nice moves, like trading Jake Slaughter for Tyson Miller, who was great last year. Obviously they signed Jorge Lopez, and Lopez signed a minor league deal, then went up. Now he just signed with Washington. So they've done a really nice job identifying, successful 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th inning relievers over the last couple of years. I think they've been pretty impressive.
What did you see from Jack Neely last year when he came over? I saw the little bits.
I mean, he's hard to miss. I mean, he's 6'8". He looks like a basketball player. Ball jumps out of his arm. When you get to somebody with that size, like, there is a tendency for the fastball to get flat. Not just because of stuff, it's just natural arm angle. So I think his first outing that happened just because he was flying back from Scranton Wilkes-Barre and he was exhausted. But when Jack Neely was sharp, man, it's tough to get out of his hand. It's good. He's got great mound presence. And when you have a 6'8" reliever, obviously it's pretty imposing and pretty difficult. So throws 95 to 97, topping at 98. I liked him a lot.
Well, that's a profile they're clearly going for. I mean, that obviously Luke Little is a huge individual. Gavin Hollowell that you mentioned, he's 6'7". I mean, those big power arms. A lot of good teams have a lot of those guys that they're throwing out there in the 6th, 7th, 8th inning. And a lot of those guys do have options, so I'm sure we'll see a lot of back and forth between Des Moines and Chicago. What do you see as far as the some of those spring battles for the bench and the bullpen? I mean, they brought over Gage Workman. I know they like Benjamin Cowles. Now Workman's a guy that came over on the Rule 5 draft. So have you seen anything from him yet, or did Iowa play against him? Did you catch him?
We saw him for like a game or two. It was he was battling some injuries when we saw Toledo. I like Gage, big guy, can really pick it at third. There's a lot of swing and miss there. Remember, I mean, he had a season, I think it was 2 years ago, where he struck out 200 times. Can't have that in the big leagues.
Yeah.
But if he can somehow cut down the swing and miss, I mean, the profile's there. He can hit for power. He can really defend. He can defend a number of positions, but especially at third. I think he's a good player. Benjamin Cowles, I haven't seen because he was injured after they traded for him, and then only went back to Tennessee. You know, just hearing about Benjamin, I mean, he could run. Obviously, he's a good contact guy, not a guy who's going to strike out all that much. Like, he is kind of the antithesis of Gage Workman. There's not a lot of swing and miss there. So I don't think Benjamin will be, I mean, maybe he'll be in contention for a fourth outfielder spot. I doubt it. I would imagine he'll start off the season either AAA Iowa, AA Tennessee. But Gage really has an opportunity to start the year up in the big leagues with the Cubs, especially because, I mean, right now it's just Matt Schaub. There's no Miles Mastrobone. There's no Patrick Wisdom. There's no David Bodie. There's no Isaac Paredes. So the four guys who got the most amount of time at third base for the Cubs no longer with the team. So right now it's either Matt Shaw or they go out externally and get somebody else, or Gage Workman has a real opportunity to crack that roster either as the starting third baseman if they don't deem Matt Shaw ready, or a backup third baseman.
Yeah. Well, another guy who's kind of on maybe his last run with the Cubs, if it doesn't go well, is Alexander Canario. Like, he was a guy who was, 2 seasons ago before he had that big injury in the Winter League, was just tearing things up, and he looked like
home runs. And I don't think it's anything that Canario hasn't done. Look at his career big league OPS, well over 800.
Well, you talk about
and there's swing and miss there, and I understand that, but big time power, great arm, can play both corner outfield positions, and you would hope that if Canario is healthy, that he's probably that fourth outfielder right now, or that guy who can come in and spell Happen left, or Kyle Tucker in right, especially because they got rid of Cody Bellinger. So I think the hope would be that Alexander Canario does get the opportunity up in the big leagues this year to stay up there for more than a week or two, be up there for a month or two, and play every other day or every third day.
I would love to see him get 200, 250 at bats and see what he could do, because so far his sample size has been so small.
Yeah, I mean, he's got over 800 OPS, but it's granted, it's been a very small cup of coffee.
Yes, very.
An espresso shot.
Who else do you see from the Iowa Cubs that maybe isn't not on the 40-man yet, but would make a push this year that could be really interesting for fans to follow?
To me, it's Moises. If he can somehow get to be a viable big league catcher defensively, he's an all-star. He is an all-star caliber hitter. In order to be an all-star caliber catcher, you either need to be really good defensively and mediocre offensively, or pretty good offensively and mediocre defensively. There is no doubt in my mind that he'll be at least pretty good offensively. He can rake. But can he be a viable big league catcher? And I saw some instances from him end of 2024 with Iowa, where it's there. He can do it. It's just not that consistent right now. One day, he'll call a game. It's a 2-hitter. He throws out 2 guys, and the I-Cubs win 4-1. The next game, it's a struggle. I mean, it's just not a linear progression for him right now, which is understandable because he just turned 21 years old. Like, he ended the season with the I-Cubs at 20. So I get why, but if the growth can be a little bit more linear, if it's more than just 2 steps forward, 2 steps back defensively,
yes,
I think he can be an impact bat. I think he can be an all-star.
Well, that's a position the Cubs need. And we'll see. Miguel Amaya looked a lot better in the second half of last year. Hopefully he can build on that success. But I mean, Moises is an exciting one to think about. But again, if the catching doesn't pan out, there aren't that many positions he can play. So that'll.
No, I mean, it's either DH or you try to put him at first, and it's not very easy having a 5'7" first baseman.
No. Yeah, that's gonna be a challenge. What about Blake. Brandon Birdsell. I got to see him pitch a few times last year on
He's a
Minor League Baseball
bulldog.
TV.
He's a bulldog, man. He just, hey, I'm going to go out there. You hit it, you can rename it. Like, I'm going to throw you my best stuff. You hit it over the wall, great. But I'm more than likely going to get you out. I'm more than likely going to strike you out. Throw you my best stuff. He's just big-time competitor. I think my comp for him would be Derek Lowe with less sinkers.
Okay.
He's just got that, like, right-handed moxie, like, it looks like a, 4-star linebacker out there, broad shoulders.
Yep.
Dude, really confident in his stuff. Doesn't care. Like, he'll throw inside. He'll nibble on the corners. It's his mound. It's his game. He dictates the tempo.
I love watching guys like that. Who else? So one of the sleepers the last couple of years that I think fans still don't quite understand, like Javier Assad.
Mm-hmm.
Dude just knows how to get outs. I mean, he doesn't do it in any conventional way. Some of the metrics don't line up, and it look like he doesn't have stuff. But I mean, he's pushing 300 career innings with an ERA under 3.5. I mean, that's
Pretty
not an easy thing to do.
Not at all.
Who might be flying under the radar that maybe on the pitching side that maybe doesn't get a lot of attention? It might have been Birdsell last year, but
I was to say it would probably be Birdsell for me right now. I think Riley Martin really has a shot. If you look at Riley Martin, left-handed reliever, just the swing and miss capability is, I mean, he gets so many whiffs. 93 to 96 from the left side, sweeping slider, devastating against lefties. It's just the typical AAA trend where it doesn't always throw strikes, but if something can click with Riley Martin, I mean, that's a guy who could go up there and get lefties out up in the big leagues, in my opinion.
excellent. Always need those. Have you heard any updates on Luke Little, on his health?
I know that he's in Arizona right now.
Okay.
I saw some pictures from Rich out there, who does a great job, scouting the backfields. That Matt Shaw's out there, and James Triantos is out there, and Luke Little, who is I saw a picture of him getting some conditioning in, and the fact that he's out there on the field and it's January, it's a pretty good sign.
Yeah.
So if you can get Luke back, I mean, there's not that many lefties who are 6'8" throwing 100. Randy Johnson was the first. There haven't been that many since. You get Luke Little back, that's a big deal. So I think that seeing him out there in Arizona right now, in Cubs practice uniform or jersey, it's a really good sign.
And before his injury last year, I think he had improved as much as anybody I saw. Like, he really struggled early with the command when he came up, but he was actually feeling pretty reliable by the time he came.
And I think that command will always be, an underlying issue for him, but you just have to take advantage of when he's feeling good and when he's synced up, because when he is, and there were moments up in the big leagues last year that he was, it's almost unhittable.
Yeah. Well, you look last year, the Cubs' approach to lefties, Drew Smiley was a lefty in the pen, but he's not really a heavy splits guy. Mark Leiter Jr. had the splitter that was basically reverse splits, but they didn't really have, except for when Little was healthy, that big dominant lefty to go through.
Yep.
What about the other guy I want to talk to you about is Porter Hodge. So, his command, all of a sudden, he came up to the bigs, and all of a sudden his command was better than it ever was in AAA. What do you think clicked for him?
I think he's simplified. I think that, in AAA, especially when you're a closer and you're on the step of getting up to the big leagues, like you either want to overthrow, you want to shove, you want to dominate. And I think when he got up to the big leagues, especially early on, it's like, hey, you got great stuff. Just get outs. Like his first pitch when he was up in AAA, it's like 99.6 miles per hour, but it was all over the place. And I think when you saw him up in the big leagues for the first time, he was more 94 to 96. It was just like, hey, slow it down. Your natural movement on your four-seam fastball is good enough to get guys out, even if you're not overthrowing at 94 to 96. And I think he did that. I think he found his way into a rhythm. He got confident, and he rode that wave the rest of the season.
His stuff is just filthy. He's so much fun to watch.
Disgusting. His stuff is really, really good.
It really is. Well, Alex, it's been great having you back on the show again. I love talking broadcasting. I the broadcasting side doesn't get enough attention, so
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, it's something that like I said, I was into it as a kid and never got quite to the point of really pursuing it, but maybe that's why I do a podcast now. But
good, you have broadcast material right now. You have a nice microphone, and
right.
good background and a good radio voice. So no, it's a great industry to get into. Very difficult to break into, very difficult to rise up within. But, when you get the opportunity to call games at the big league level or call games overseas, it makes all the trials, tribulations, travels worth it.
Are you going to get to go to Japan?
Probably not. I don't know. Until the game happens, you never know. But, I'd love to. It'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Go ahead.
Maybe Japan. Maybe I'll just go hang in the Tokyo Dome a little bit.
What would be your goal? Would you love to be the voice of a team someday?
Of course. Whether it's with the Cubs or another team, when you break into the industry when you're 21 years old, your goal isn't to work in the minor leagues, it's to work in the major leagues. So that being said, I love being able to work with a Cubs affiliate and the Chicago Cubs. And I've worked for a lot of affiliates for different organizations, Tampa Bay Rays, Kansas City Royals, Milwaukee Brewers. There is no fan base quite like the Cubs fan base. In terms of intensity, in terms of communication, in terms of fandom, fanhood, it's really special. And I think I've been able to recognize that not only being in Iowa, but also, going up to the big leagues and making the debut and being able to call a game at Wrigley Field. It's not hyperbolic. Wrigley Field is the best place in the big leagues to watch a game. And my heart. So
I can't wait to get back there this summer. So it's been great having you on. Hopefully we'll connect at CubsCon later this week. And great. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. And check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/CubsPS+ to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS+ podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!